Dr. Tim Furnish. He's been a Madison Forum member for quite some time, and he's spoken on Islam. He has his Ph.D., and correct me if I mistake this, Arabic Studies. He's lectured
Islamic history.
Islamic history, and he's lectured to the U.S. military as an advisor on Arabic dynamics and Islam. And he is just an exceptional, and he's also a university professor, just an exceptional person, and his thought process is very good. And he's going to be speaking on, and this is an interesting title, and The One-Eyed Man is King, Trump's Policies Toward the Islamic World. And we're all very interested in speaking. I'm going to move to another location so I don't get included in this video.
Yeah, my title, The One-Eyed Man is King, Trump's Islamic World Policies. It's from a long blog post I did last year on, I looked at Trump's national counterterrorism strategy, which came out last fall. Every president does this at some point in their term. And, you know, Bush did it, Obama did it. That's about as far back as I went to look at it. But basically, it's how you're going to deal with terrorism. And so, my title comes from the fact that I think, well, Trump is, you know, at least half right, as opposed to Bush and Obama, who pretty much had both their eyes closed on the topic. So, I'll return to that at the end. So, I had 4 things I wanted to talk about: immigration, our situation under Trump with our allies in the Middle East, our policies specifically toward ISIS, and then from that talking about counterterrorism, terrorism in general, just, you know, sort of a broad brush look at it. Excuse me. So, you know what I found when doing this, and I had seen some of this before. I'm an adjunct professor up at Reinhardt. I teach world history. I also teach Middle East history, history of terrorism, and military history, ancient and medieval. All the fun stuff before there were guns, which was much more interesting. But a couple of times, I've taught American history a few times, and specifically after the 2016 election, you know, when we had all the brouhaha about it, and you know, how Hillary really won. So much like Stacey Abrams, right? So I took time out. I remember I was teaching American history that term. I took time out a couple of classes to talk about the election and the Electoral College. And, you know, these young kids, well, we know they don't know that much in general anyway. A lot of them didn't know, they don't understand the Electoral College. And so I went through it. And then a little bit later, remember, Trump came out with the travel ban, the, you know, mendaciously named Muslim travel ban, which of course it wasn't, but that's what it was described as. It's still described as that, which was upheld by the Supreme Court last year. But I went through some discussion about immigration, which is, I recapitulated some of that yesterday when I was putting this together, and I had forgotten, it is really difficult to get good data on immigration in the United States. Have you ever noticed that? You can't go to one place and find out, like, how many immigrants come in per year. You have to go to several different places and try to piece it together like Sherlock Holmes. It's bloody annoying. So I did a bunch of that because I think, really, for a lot of folks, and with good reason, a major, if not the major aspect of Trump's policy changes affect immigration. And I think positively, but I'll get to that. First, let's talk about the bad news. So, for instance, my nice chart here, which is just
that's pretty.
Yeah. This is, I found some information. Refugees, and, you know, there's a difference between refugees and immigrants, okay? So there's that distinction. Immigrants are just apply to get in. And of course, the difference between legal and illegal. Mainly, I'm just looking at legal immigrants, okay? I'm not looking at the southern border stuff anymore. I'm looking at immigration from the Islamic world. That's what I'm looking at, because that's my salient point here, how Trump's policies have affected that. Refugees by year 1975 to 2016, which is the last year for which I could find data. And the average, you know, it goes way up and down. In 1975, it was 150,000 a year. It went up in 1980. Remember the Mariel boat lift from Cuba? That was the big reason for that. Some of us remember that. It went way up again in 1990, 91. I'll get to that in a moment. But In the 21st century, right, so since 2000, well, technically 2001, we averaged right around, for most of this millennium, I should say, about a million a year or so immigrants. The refugee number is smaller, but that's what we've averaged, and let me pull this one over here, do immigrants, and then come back to refugees. There was a huge spike. See this huge spike here? 1990, 1991, all right? Anybody know why that was? This is a huge spike in legal immigration.
Policy change.
Yeah, but specifically, Teddy Kennedy and George H.W. Bush got together for the major immigration reform of 1990. So the numbers skyrocketed. They changed a number of things. A lot of the stuff having to do with family members being able to come because they've got one family member here, came out of that legislation. It also greatly increased the number of, it changed the visa requirements so that a lot more people who were basically not highly educated could come into the country. So the big spike in that. Right now, okay, the data I had was through last year, best I could find. 45 million, 44.5 million, I always like to round up when you get to 45 million legal immigrants in the United States, which is about 13.7% of the population, which is not the highest ever in history. Anybody know when the highest was? About 1890. We were almost at 15%, and that was in the waves of those huge, the huge immigration from Eastern and Southern Europe that took place, between the Civil War and World War I. So there was a lot of that. Percentage was higher, but the raw number is the highest it's ever been. Legal, and of course that's not even counting illegal, but that's not my brief today. So that's the context in terms of immigration, in terms of the numbers. Now, specifically, a lot of the folks that come from the Islamic world come as refugees, as you probably have some idea. Between 2002 and 2016, the United States took in 400,000 Christian refugees and 280,000 Muslim refugees, right? But the numbers started going up every year, of course, certainly by the second Obama term. By 2016, which again is the last year I could find data, 39,000 Muslim refugees were allowed in under the Obama administration. And for the last several years of the Obama administration, as near as I can tell, the numbers, of course, were higher for Muslims than for Christians. Now, I'm not saying I'm in favor of religious discrimination when it comes to immigration, but two factors here are important. According to all kinds of data sources, Christians are the most persecuted people on the face of this planet. Sri Lanka is your latest example, right? Christians are the most persecuted people, and this is not just, right-wing sources saying this. There's lots of leftist and liberal sources that are finally admitting this is what's going on. Of course, this is rather ironic because Christianity is the world's largest religion. About 2.3 billion people. I tell my kids in class, I'm not getting into an argument about whether the Baptists think Catholics are Christians or vice versa, okay? Historically, sociologically, they're Christian churches, and those people are persecuted. And then if you look at the list of persecuting countries, what are they primarily? Mostly majority Muslim countries. Really, the only exception to this is North Korea, which of course is its own brand of crazy. But basically, not only is Christianity the most persecuted religion, but despite the crowing of atheists quite often, there was a big deal about this in the news recently. A study came out, I think it was a Pew study, that showed that percentage-wise, there are now more atheists and agnostics than there are evangelicals. And I saw this in all kinds of social media. I'm like, so? You're not counting Catholics and mainline Protestant and Orthodox and everybody else. America's still 71% Christian. Now, we may not agree with that it acts like it, but it is still 71% Christian, okay? So, about anywhere between 0.8% and 1.1% are Muslim. Right? The Muslim population is around 3 to 3.5 million in this country. The most persecuted people on earth, and particularly in the Middle East, are Christians. But yet the Obama administration is bringing in many people who weren't persecuted. Why? Well, you take 80,000 people to Minneapolis area, and now you have Ilhan Omar as a representative from the 5th district of the 5th congressional district, just west of Minneapolis. The Obama administration seems to have believed that America basically was too Christian and, if you will, too white, which I hate getting into that discussion because it's I was on radio several times recently, and I was talking about this whole mythology that the left has created and goes with it. Christianity is a white religion, and Islam is a brown or dark-skinned religion. I don't know, my Tanzanian and Ethiopian Lutheran brethren would think that was a bit weird, as well as would the many, many Catholics in Africa. And plus, I've been to Iran. Some of those people are whiter than I am. The Ayatollahs are very white. So it's just this crazy mythology that the left is trying to foster, that we hear it at the leadership all along down, particularly in the media too. I mean, it would have been a surprise to the Sri Lankan Christians that were killed on Easter to find out they were white Christians. I think that would have been a big surprise to them.
They weren't.
What's that?
They weren't, they were colored.
The Sri Lankans?
Yeah.
They're
The ones I saw.
the Indians.
Yeah.
The Sri Lankans are pretty brown.
And they're Christians.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's my point. They're about the color of that chair.
Okay.
Again, I don't care what color they are, but I get tired of the media telling me that Christianity is a
Right.
white religion, because
Yeah.
it's ludicrous.
If everybody can hold their questions to the
All
end.
right.
So anyway, we don't have data from the last couple of years of the Obama administration, but it's clear that the number of Muslims for at least it looks like most of the years of the second term outweighed the number of Christian refugees allowed in. And I'm trying to find some data on how many were brought to Georgia. I found an AJC article from early in 2017 that said in the last quarter of 2016, Georgia, the state of Georgia took in 164 Syrians, 134 Somalians. Like, what is a Somalian? It's the AJC. 78 Iranians and 42 Iraqis. And some of them were from, of course, the so-called Muslim banned countries. Anyway, I'll come back to that in a minute. I found a group called New American Pathways that has a headquarters downtown. It's affiliated with the Episcopalian Church, the Episcopal Church, I should say. Let's see. In 2016, New American Pathways welcomed 502 refugees to Metro Atlanta, mostly from Burma, Myanmar, what it's called now, but after that, Syria, Afghanistan, Somalia, Eritrea, Ethiopia, and the Congo. Democratic Republic of Congo, which is neither democratic nor republic, but it's still the Congo. The People's Republic of North Korea. Anyway, so that's just a bit of data on that. Trump's travel ban, you remember, went through 3 incarnations and was finally upheld by Supreme Court last summer. The countries included Iran, Libya, Syria, Yemen, Somalia, North Korea, and Venezuela, which together covered about 12% of the world's Muslims, but yet the media continued to call it a Muslim travel ban. Basically what it is, it's a failed state travel ban is what it is. Libya is a failed state. You know what failed state in geopolitical terms is? The government can't control what's going on, basically, and you have usually competing governments. Libya, Syria, Yemen, and Somalia fall under this. North Korea is, of course, North Korea, little rocket man land. And Venezuela, as we know now, is a failing socialist quagmire. So, and Iran is the world's top sponsor of terrorism. It has been since about 1979. So, the Trump travel ban has affected these countries, and particularly Syria. And it's not entirely unproblematic about Syria. I'll explain it in a second. So basically, under Trump, what have we done? We've gone from refugees, not immigrants. The immigration numbers, as near as I can tell under Trump, have dropped a little bit. We're still around 800 to 900,000 immigrants coming in a year, so it's dropped some. The refugee situation has changed quite a bit, though. Under Obama, they were letting in an average of about 85,000 refugees a year. Trump dropped it a year or two ago to 45,000, and Secretary of State Pompeo just said this week that they're dropping it to 30,000. The cap is 30,000 refugees, all right, instead of 85 or 45. And here's the big change. Christian refugees under the Trump administration outnumber Muslim refugees allowed in. considerably. Through the early part of this year, I couldn't find data for last year, but through the first quarter of this year, 83% of the refugees that have been allowed in have been Christian and 14% Muslim. And again, I'm not saying that I'm in favor of a religious discrimination refugee filter, but basically I'm saying if you look at who's the most persecuted group of people, and particularly in the Middle East, it's clearly Christians. So if you're going to let in refugees on the basis of political and religious persecution, you would let in Christians. Now, you would let in some Muslims too, because there are different sects of Islam, and not all of the sects of Islam are jihadist, as I've talked about before. I'm not sure everybody here doesn't agree with me, but you're wrong. I got into this at the Cherokee. I got invited a couple years ago to the Cherokee Tea Party thing, and somebody was laying into me about that. And I said, "Sorry, man, your data's just wrong on that one." I do this for a living, okay? So anyway, I won't tell you how to change oil. You don't tell me about Muslim refugees. So. Most refugees coming in under the Trump administration so far have been the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ukraine, interestingly enough, Burma, and Eritrea. Eritrea is that little country that broke away from Ethiopia. It's up on the coast of Northeast Africa. And you tend to think it's a Muslim country, but you have to actually look at the demographics of that country. It's a majority Christian country, but just barely, like 50 to 48% or something. So here's the problem, I mentioned a minute ago. One problematic aspect of what I think is a much improved situation is that since we cut down so many numbers of refugees allowed in, a lot of Christians from places like Syria, where they are really being persecuted. I mean, things have gotten better since the ISIS caliphate has been destroyed, which I'll get to in just a moment. But people are still very much persecuted in the Middle East, particularly in Syria, that are Christian. But the number of Christians coming in have been reduced quite a bit. So. That's a bit problematic, but here's the chart here. Total blue, Muslim is orange, and Christian is green. And this is Obama, and then this is Trump. So, and again, I'm not saying there aren't there aren't Muslims that aren't persecuted by other Muslims. There are, but you know, Saudi Arabia doesn't let in Christian refugees. You know, majority Muslim countries favor Muslim refugees. Well, usually they prefer they come here, but if they are going to let in refugees, usually a culture or country will let in their co-religionists first, particularly if they're persecuted. But you know, under previous administrations, we didn't do that, so I think that's something that Trump has improved. Just makes sense. All right, foreign policy, just a couple of things. The three big changes that Trump has done has been, first of all, he's moved U.S. back toward our traditional relationship with Israel. You know, Obama famously had a very acrimonious relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel in general, and you know, at one point had advisors sent over there to try to help the opposition party win elections there, which I always find ironic when we talk about Russian interference in our elections.
Yeah. Yep.
And this wasn't just Facebook ads. This was like people on the ground advising the opposition party to the sitting prime minister of the country on how to defeat him.
Paid by, they had an office over there.
Yeah, but Trump has moved away from that. And the two big things he did, of course, you probably know, he moved the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which now other countries are following suit. And he also just recently. And I just had an article about this. If you a very good online publication, if you don't know it, it's called thestream.org. Michael, do you know the Stream? Maybe you know.
No.
Stream.org. And I write weekly for them now. And I had an article a couple weeks ago about this. And Trump basically said the United States would acknowledge Israeli annexation of the Golan Heights, which is the area of Syria that they took in the '67 war. You know, after both of these things, we heard all these apocalyptic predictions. Oh, the Muslim world will rise against us if we move the embassy to Jerusalem. And you know, there were a few Palestinians throwing rocks, and then that was it. So Trump has done that. Trump basically, as you know, repudiated, I should say probably, the so-called Iran deal that Obama had negotiated with the Iranians. And has moved away from Iran and back toward our traditional ally, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And you know who the first president was to sit down with the king of Saudi Arabia and forge this alliance? It was FDR. There's pictures of FDR. They met on a destroyer, him and Ibn Saud, King Saud, back in, I don't know, 44 or something. So Trump has gone back to that. And so anyway, that's sort of two sides of the same coin. It's the three things: Israel, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. So I don't really know what the thinking was with the Obama administration with trying to cozy up to Iran. You know, Iran is trying to get nuclear weapons. There's no doubt. In the case, by the way, if you don't know, I have actually been to Iran and returned with all of my digits.
You're lucky.
Yeah, I was invited to speak there. This is before I was working with the government. Back in 2008, there's an annual conference in Tehran on Islamic apocalyptic beliefs, which are very strong, of course, in the Shia Islam of Iran. And I've written a lot on that. In fact, this book and one of my other books was on this topic. So I got invited over there. I'd met some. I'd been to London and spoken to some Ayatollahs at a conference, and so I got invited. So I thought, man, it's a free trip on the Ayatollahs. Why not go? It's a little nerve-wracking when you get off the plane in Tehran, your Air France flight, and they take your passport, and you don't get your passport back until you're stepping back onto the plane. Then they invited me back, and I'm like, oh no, I'm not spending the rest of my life in a Viet prison, which is what you're trying to do. Anyway, but I've been to Iran, and so know a little bit about some things going over there. Plus, I've studied it quite a bit. But Iran clearly wants nuclear weapons. They do not want nuclear weapons to use on anybody because they aren't stupid. All right? There's this trope on the right, and you know, and I'm conservative, but not everything that everybody on the right says is right. There's this common belief among many in the Republican Party that comes out of the evangelical churches, for the most part, that Iran wants a nuclear weapon to use it on Israel so they can spark the coming of their Messiah figure, the so-called 12th Imam. I can tell you right now, categorically, that's garbage. They don't want nuclear weapons for that reason, because the Iranians, the Ayatollahs that run the country, drive Rolls Royces and have Rolex watches, and you know, a lot of them have 4 wives. So you got to have a lot of cash to keep 4 wives happy. So they know that if they were to nuke Tel Aviv, about 22 minutes later, Iran would be a glowing radioactive parking lot.
Yeah.
The Iranians are anything but stupid. All right, trust me, they're very, very smart people. Just because they have turbans and beards doesn't make them dumb. So, anyway, but Obama had this big Iran deal where we were going to like all these sanctions and excuse me, I shouldn't say sanctions. All these sort of constraints were put on Iran in terms of them developing their nuclear program. And you know, part of that deal was we released about $150 billion in assets that had been frozen from the time when Jimmy Carter was president, when the Iranian Revolution happened. Remember the big deal? They were flying pallets of cash on C-130s. Which used to do a bank transfer. That makes me really suspicious, President Obama, for some reason, on small unmarked bills on pallets. Anyway, but the idea was that they would somehow coax Iran into being an American ally in the region, and then all you got to do is spend 5 minutes reading about the Islamic Republic and the foundations of it to realize that's just asinine. So that didn't work out. You know, Trump rightfully said, "Oh, the heck with that. We're not working with those guys." They have been since about 1979, according to the State Department. Iran has been the world's foremost state sponsor of terrorism. So, on the other hand, we still give the Pakistanis money, although Trump cut it down, and they were the ones that were hiding bin Laden for several years. So, now the problematic issue with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia thing is that, as some of you probably know, the fundamentalist Islam of Saudi Arabia is virtually indistinguishable from the fundamentalist Islam of ISIS and Al-Qaeda and most of the other world's terrorist groups. So Saudi Arabia, I always tell people, is a profoundly schizophrenic place. It's politically our ally, has been our ally going back to FDR, but the brand of Islam that they espouse in that country is violently, literally, anti-American. So there will be a reckoning for that someday, but I don't know when. All right, Trump and Israel. So those are the big changes. All right, ISIS, of course, is the other one. If you can tell here, this is how much area ISIS controlled at the height of their caliphate in 2014. And the colors a little bit, but the only ISIS control on this is a map of April 2019. See these 2 little areas right here out in the desert? That's all ISIS has now. They don't have any cities. And this is a direct result of President Obama actually allowing US Special Forces to go after them and arming the Kurds. Obama talked a lot about arming the Kurds. The Kurds, by the way, see all this yellow part of Syria? That's now controlled by the Kurds. The Kurds, if you don't know, are a separate ethnic group. They aren't Arab, they aren't Turkish, they aren't Persian. They're Kurdish. They've been there for a long time. They were the ones who got the real short end of the stick after World War I, did not get a country. They're the largest group of stateless people in the world. About 30 million Kurds do not have their own country. I mean, they have sort of a quasi-independent country in northern Iraq, but it's still part of the Federation of Iraq. And the reason they don't have a country, besides the fact that Woodrow Wilson screwed them over at the end of World War I, is that to create a Kurdistan would carve pieces off of what? Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and even Iran. Well, I don't think that's going back under the control of Damascus anytime soon. And those are the guys, the Kurds, although they're Sunni Muslims, they seem to like be immune to the plague of fundamentalism. And the Kurds and the ISIS guys hate each other. And the Kurds are some of the probably the best fighters against them. And we started arming them. We kept talking about arming them under Obama. We did, but we started arming them under Trump. So ISIS has been destroyed in terms of its territorial caliphate. But we still have this. This is, if you didn't see this, this was from this past week. This chap in the middle, I forgot his name, but he's the head of the Tawhid Jama'at, which is the group that did the bombings in Sri Lanka that killed 300 Christians. And this is him, a video of him that he put up pledging allegiance to ISIS. So basically what's happened with ISIS is they no longer have a state, which is good, but they are operative in a lot of countries. They basically, this is hard to tell, but the red-orange areas are where ISIS is operational right now. Libya, Nigeria, Mali, Algeria, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Indonesia, the Philippines. Basically what they've done is they've kind of devolved back from a territorial state, their so-called caliphate, to being a terrorist group. So it's not, the situation is better, that's my point, okay? We have destroyed ISIS. Obama kept talking about decimating ISIS. And literally that's really kind of what we did, because you know what the word decimate literally means. It means reduced by a factor of 1/10 from the Roman army's practice of if a Roman legion had problems, particularly cowardice in battle, they would line up the survivors and go down the line and kill every 10th man. The Romans were pretty brutal with unit discipline.
It was effective.
And it was effective, yes.
Persuasive.
So, all right, so I found this online. I really want to show you this. See, Trump with an eye patch.
Yeah.
It's clearly photoshopped. I was going to use Dan Crenshaw, but I'm not talking about Dan Crenshaw. Dan Crenshaw is right.
Yeah.
That's just really cool. So there's my one-eyed Trump. All right, so you got the meme there. Trump's counterterrorism strategy. This is my last thing, and then you guys can ask me. Trump's counterterrorism strategy, which came out last fall, is about a 25-page document. A number of profound changes from what Bush and Obama had been doing. Right? Bush and Obama both, and I think Bush was less egregious about this than Obama. And by the way, I don't think Obama was a Muslim, but I do think that his policies were such that it really didn't make a whole lot of difference. Remember the first foreign policy thing that Obama ever did, June of 2009, after he was elected, was go to Cairo for a conference and then basically apologize for the existence of Western civilization, which I thought was absurd. But then and then he bowed to the King of Saudi Arabia, and then it was just downhill from there.
He had to set the stage.
So the Bush and Obama counterterrorism strategies, because I looked at both of them too. Basically, there were a number of things in them. Presuppositions that turned out not to work very well. One of them was the so-called Arab Spring, which started back in 2011. If you remember this, Arab Spring, it was when the revolution started in Tunisia, and then other countries started having them. Libya had it, they got rid of Gaddafi, which of course turned out to be a mixed blessing, because what's Libya now? Libya is a failed state with 3 different governments. Syria started having its civil war. Yemen had a bunch of problems. So, many in the establishment, and not just on the left, there were many on the right that thought this too, that there's a bunch of budding Jeffersonian Democrats in the Middle East, and now that their dictators are being overthrown, they'll all write constitutions based on the American Constitution, and everyone will live in harmony. But it didn't quite work out like that, did it? I remember last time I was in Israel, I've been 3 times, last time I was in Israel 3 or 4 years ago, somebody I knew the former Israeli ambassador to Egypt. And so we had dinner one night, very nice man, and he was telling me the story about how when he was working in Egypt, this was back when Hosni Mubarak was still there, the previous president, twice removed before the Muslim Brotherhood guy. Hosni Mubarak was the guy that came to power after, remember, Anwar Sadat was killed. So they're having this meeting, and Hosni Mubarak, this was in front of the Israeli ambassador, Mubarak was just raging. And I guess it would have been, I don't remember which American president it was, he was mad at, but he was just raging. The Americans, they don't understand my people. My people are not ready for democracy. That's what the president of Egypt saying that. Yeah.
Was that Clinton?
What's that?
Would that have been Clinton?
I'm not sure it was, might have been, I don't remember now. But you know what? It doesn't matter, before Trump, they all pretty much had the same viewpoint, largely when it comes to this issue. So Bush and Obama, the national counterterrorism strategists, both thought that the Arab Spring would help defuse terrorism. Of course it didn't, it's made it worse because it's created failed states. That Pakistan would help us with counterterrorism. Yeah, that's worked really well. The country that was hiding bin Laden for years. And the big problem with, of course, this, both the Bush and Obama counterterrorism strategies, is that the Obama one never mentioned the word Islam. The Bush one mentioned it once, and that was only to call Al-Qaeda a, quote, distorted interpretation, unquote, of Islam. This usual trope that we hear, radical extremists. It's like a mantra. Jihad in Islam is neither extremist nor radical. It's frankly mainstream, has been for 1,400 years. Trump's 2018 National Counterterrorism Strategy, again, which came out last fall, does talking about the mantra, radical Islamist terrorism, 16 times. But at least it does say that, so this is why, again, he has one eye open. And it does say that we must do more than just kill terrorists, which Obama was fond of using drones to kill people, but never once tried to counter the real problem. The real problem is the ideology. It's that understanding of Islam, which is very mainstream, that supports terrorism, supports jihad, because they don't call it terrorism, they call it jihad. And again, radical Islamist terrorism, all right? Don't have time to go into this, to briefly tell you, I've got a lot of stuff that's in my books, I've got a website, I talk about this quite a bit. The founder of Islam, Muhammad, waged jihad, all right? I have this really sort of simple definition. If the founder of a religion does something, when the followers do that, it, by definition, can't be radical.
Yeah.
If you fast during Lent, sorry, Baptists don't know that much about that, but I'm a Lutheran, we still do that. One of 12 Lutherans in North Georgia.
Not true.
No, I
Give up something.
Yeah, but Jesus fasted for 40 days, which I'm sorry to say, I've never actually tried. But if you do something, if you're a Christian, do something Jesus did, or if you're Buddhist and do something Buddha did, I don't think you're radical. If you're Muslim and do something Muhammad did, which includes waging jihad on non-Muslims and conquering them, or ordering people beheaded, which Muhammad did, according to the Islamic sources, I don't think you're being a radical extremist. I think you're actually mainstream. There are radicals and extremists in Islam. They're the sects of Islam, and I always have to spell that for the army guys so they don't get excited. S-E-C-T-S. Sects of Islam, where you don't do that. Okay, they're minorities, but they exist. The Ismaili Shiites, some of the other Shia, some of the mystical Sufi movements. These people don't believe in violent jihad, but they are the minority. In mainstream Islam, even and including many people who don't wage terrorism, because most Muslims don't wage terrorism. The idea of jihad is operative. Jihad means fighting against people who aren't non-Muslim to expand the realm of Islam, and this goes back 1,400 years. So, and the word Islamist, you see the word Islamist a lot, okay? And this is a word that cropped up about 25 years ago to mean politically active Muslims. It's just a frankly stupid term, because Islam by definition is politically active, right? right? Again, mainstream Islam is what I'm talking about. The people that aren't politically active in Islam, in some of these sects, they're the radicals and the extremists, all right? So, you know, Trump's national counterterrorism strategy, you know, does at one point say radical Islamist terrorism is defined as twisted ideologies that justify the murder of innocent victims. Again, at least we don't hear it as much as we used to with Bush and Tony Blair and these guys, perverted brand of Islam. Islam's been hijacked, all that stuff, which is just goofy and not correct. But here we have, and again, I'm sure Trump had some just broad, you know, input into this, but this is basically functionaries writing this, right? So that's a bit problematic. And there's also a small list of non-Muslim terrorist groups that are included in Trump's national counterterrorism strategy. And one of them is the Nordic resistance movement. Just so you know, guys that dress up like Vikings and cause problems. Yeah, I think there are 6 members of the Nordic resistance movement, and they all look like Thor in the Avengers movie.
And they're all Lutherans.
And they're Lutherans,
Yeah.
probably. No, we wish. They're probably actually pagans. They probably do actually worship Odin. But there's like 6 or 7 of them. It's sort of like if you look at the State Department list of terrorist groups, all right? And they just added a couple weeks ago the Iranian Republican Guards Corps, which is sort of the specialized Praetorian Guard that the Islamic Republic has. But it's the one that not only keeps the Ayatollahs in power, but goes around the world and causes problems other places. The State Department terrorist list is now 76% Muslim groups. And it really would be higher than that if they'd be honest. Like for instance, they got 2 offshoot groups of the IRA on there that are basically 6 guys in a pub that have, you know, are still faxing death threats to the Queen. And they haven't done anything in years, but they're included on the list. Or there's actually a Jewish group on the list that has been defunct for something like 20 years. You remember, oh gosh, it was the one Israeli prime minister that was killed back in the 90s. I can't remember his name now. But anyway, some extreme Jewish group that did this is still on the list, but they haven't done anything in 20 years. So if you really took out the groups that are jokes, like the Nordic resistance movement and some of these others, the percentage of groups that are actual transnational terrorist groups on the State Department list that are Muslim would probably be up to 80 or 90%. Because that's the #1 ideology for sponsoring terrorism. And then here's my coolest one with Trump. Remember when he went to Saudi Arabia a year or 2 ago?
Yeah, that was
And he did the sword dance with the Saudi
Yeah.
guys? So anyway, I titled this "Speak Loudly and Carry a Large Sword." Which is basically Trump's policy, or you could probably say tweet repeatedly and carry a large sword.
Yeah.
So,
I love that.
which I have a defense, so I think that's a really cool thing he's doing. Although Trump clearly has no idea what to do with that sword. So at least he didn't stab the king or anything. So that was good. So, all right. Anyway, that's that. If you guys want to ask questions, please feel free. Go ahead.